The sound of my daughter calling me a pathetic loser through the thin walls of our suburban house hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I was crouched under the hood of my ancient Chevy in the driveway, wrench in hand, pretending I couldn't hear Emily's voice carrying from the kitchen window. Mom, seriously, just divorce him already. Dad's embarrassing. My friends see him at school events in those cheap shirts, and I want to crawl under a rock. My wife Kathy's laugh was like ice water down my spine. Honey, your father has his limitations, but we make it work. Make it work? He fixes cars for a living while you're selling million-dollar houses. You could do so much better. I straightened up slowly, my 46-year-old back protesting. The wrench felt heavy in my oil-stained hands. 22 years of marriage, and this was what I got. A 20-year-old daughter who saw me as a social liability and a wife who apparently agreed. The November wind cut through my thin jacket as I walked toward the front door. Our house sat on Maple Street, one of those faded middle-class neighborhoods where everyone knew everyone else's business. Mrs. Cartwright was already peeking through her curtains next door, probably wondering why I was standing in my own driveway looking like I'd seen a ghost. Inside, the conversation stopped abruptly when I entered the kitchen. Kathy was leaning against the granite countertop, the one she'd insisted we couldn't afford but bought anyway, scrolling through her phone. Emily sat at the breakfast bar, laptop open, probably updating her social media with more complaints about her terrible life. Hey, Ben, Kathy said without looking up. How's the car? Fixed. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, noting how she flinched slightly when I popped it open. Funny thing about fixing things. Sometimes you discover they were broken in ways you never expected. Emily rolled her eyes. Dad, can you not be cryptic? It's weird. Cryptic? I took a long drink. I thought I was being pretty clear. Kathy finally looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her green eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or just annoyance that I was interrupting her evening routine of ignoring my existence. I'm going out tonight, she announced. Client dinner, big sale pending. Another one? I sat down across from Emily, who immediately closed her laptop. That's what, 3 this week? Business is good. Kathy's voice had that sharp edge it got when she was lying. Some of us are ambitious, Emily snorted, unlike others. The comment hung in the air like smoke. I finished my beer in silence, watching my family, if I could still call it that, avoid eye contact with me. Outside, a train whistle echoed in the distance, that lonely sound that always made me think of people going somewhere better. Well, I said, standing up, don't let me keep you from your important evening. I headed to the garage, ostensibly to clean up my tools, but really to think. The space smelled of motor oil and old wood, familiar and comforting in a way my own house wasn't anymore. I'd built this life with my hands, the deck, the fence, the shelving units Kathy filled with her real estate awards. But somewhere along the way, I'd become the hired help in my own home. My phone buzzed. Text from my buddy Dave, who ran Murphy's Bar downtown. Beer and sympathy available. You look like you need both. Dave was ex-cop, the kind of guy who noticed things. If he was reaching out, it meant my misery was showing more than I thought. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. Kathy's BMW was already gone, off to another client dinner that would run until midnight. Emily's light was on upstairs, probably live streaming her complaints to her college friends about how embarrassing her father was. Murphy's Bar sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, a dive that had been serving the same blue-collar crowd for 30 years. The neon sign flickered, casting red shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Inside, it was all dark wood and dim lighting, the kind of place where you could drink away your problems without judgment. Dave was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He was my age, but looked older, gray stubble and lines around his eyes from 20 years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. Ben, he nodded toward an empty stool. Usual? Make it a double. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon and slid it across the scarred bar top. Want to talk about it? What's to talk about? My wife thinks I'm a loser, my daughter's ashamed of me, and I spend my days fixing other people's problems while my own life falls apart. Sounds about right for a Tuesday. Dave leaned against the bar. But there's more, isn't there? I told him about the conversation I'd overheard, about Kathy's increasingly frequent client dinners, about the way Emily looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. Dave listened without interrupting, occasionally refilling my glass. You think she's cheating? He asked finally. I think a lot of things. Thinking and knowing are different animals. Want to find out which animal you're dealing with? I looked at him over my glass. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes the truth is worth knowing, even when it hurts. The bourbon burned going down, but it was nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. For 22 years, I'd been the good husband, the provider, the guy who fixed things and kept his mouth shut. Maybe it was time to fix something else. What would I need to do? Dave smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Leave that to me. But Ben, once you open that door, you can't close it again. I finished my drink and stood up. Some doors need to be opened. The drive home took me past the Riverside Motel, a rundown place on the edge of town that rented rooms by the hour. I almost didn't notice the familiar BMW in the parking lot, but something made me slow down and look closer. License plate, K-Cells 1. Kathy's vanity plate. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I pulled into the shadows across the street. Through the thin curtains of room 12, I could see two figures silhouetted against the lamplight. One was definitely my wife. I'd recognize that profile anywhere. The other was taller, broader, gesturing with his hands in a way that seemed familiar. I sat there for an hour, watching my marriage die in real time. When they finally emerged, I got a clear look at the other man, Roger Whitman, mortgage broker at First National Bank. I knew him from Emily's high school graduation party where he'd spent the evening telling everyone how successful he was. Kathy kissed him goodbye, not a peck on the cheek, but a real kiss, the kind she hadn't given me in years. Then, she got in her BMW and drove home to the husband she thought was too stupid to notice. Roger climbed into a silver Mercedes with the license plate Lone King. Even his car was obnoxious. I waited until they were both gone, then walked across the street to the motel office. The clerk was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who barely looked up from her magazine. Help you? Yeah, I think someone hit my car in your parking lot earlier. Mind if I check your security footage? She glanced at the 20 I slid across the counter. What time you thinking? Around 9:30? 20 minutes later, I had a USB drive with clear footage of my wife and Roger Whitman entering and leaving room 12 together. The timestamp showed they'd been there for exactly 97 minutes. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and rage. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd made a decision that would change everything. Kathy's car was already in the garage, and the house was dark except for the porch light she always left on. I sat in my truck for a long moment, feeling the weight of the USB drive in my pocket. Inside, I could hear the shower running upstairs. Washing away the evidence, probably. I went to the kitchen and opened another beer, then sat at the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, where we'd helped Emily with homework, where we'd planned our future back when we still had one. When Kathy came downstairs in her bathrobe, hair still damp, she found me waiting. "How was your client dinner?" I asked. "Fine. Long, but productive." She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water. "How was your evening?" "Educational." She paused, water bottle halfway to her lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I learned something new tonight. About loyalty, about honesty, about what happens when people think you're too stupid to notice what's right in front of your face." "Ben, you're scaring me." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Scaring you?" "Kathy, you haven't seen scary yet." She set down the water bottle with shaking hands. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of her BMW in the motel parking lot. Her face went white. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Upstairs, Emily's music was playing, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to implode. "How long?" I asked. "Ben." "How long, Kathy?" 6 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of client dinners and late nights at the office. Half a year of me being the fool who brought her coffee in the morning and asked about her day. "Why?" She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You really want to know?" I asked, didn't I? "Because Roger makes me feel alive. Because he has ambition, dreams, plans for the future. Because when I'm with him, I remember who I used to be before I settled for—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. "Before you settled for me." I didn't mean it like that. "Yes, you did." I stood up, surprised by how calm I felt. "You meant it exactly like that." I headed for the stairs, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her mouth open. "Where are you going?" "To pack a bag. I'll be staying at Dave's for a while." "Ben, wait. We can work this out. We can go to counseling." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to her. Kathy, you just told me you're cheating on me because I don't live up to your standards. What exactly do you think counseling is going to fix? She started to cry then, but they were the wrong kind of tears. Not tears of remorse or guilt, but tears of frustration that her comfortable life was about to get complicated. What about Emily? What about her? She thinks I'm an embarrassment anyway. Maybe she'll be happier with Roger as a stepfather. I went upstairs and packed a bag while my wife sobbed in the kitchen. Emily's door was closed, music still playing. I thought about knocking, about trying to explain, but what was the point? She'd made her feelings about me clear enough. 20 minutes later, I was back in my truck with a duffel bag in the passenger seat and 22 years of marriage in the rearview mirror. Dave's apartment was above the bar, a sparse bachelor pad that smelled like cigarettes and regret. He took one look at me and opened 2 beers without being asked. That bad? Worse. I told him about the motel, about Roger Whitman, about Kathy's brutal honesty regarding why she'd strayed. So what's the plan? I took a long drink and looked out the window at the empty street below. I don't know yet, but I'm done being the nice guy. Good, Dave said. Nice guys finish last anyway. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the shop, I drove to the office of Burton and Associates, the law firm that handled my union's legal issues. Marcus Burton was a shark in a $1,000 suit, the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments. He listened to my story with the detached interest of a professional who'd heard it all before. Adultery isn't grounds for anything special in this state, he said. But if you want a divorce, we can make it happen. I want more than a divorce. I want justice. He leaned back in his leather chair. Justice is expensive, Ben, and it's not always satisfying. How expensive? Depends on how far you want to take it. I thought about Kathy's tears the night before, about Emily's casual cruelty, about Roger Whitman's smug face. As far as it takes, Burton smiled. Now we're talking. The first step was documentation. Burton had a private investigator on retainer, a former cop named Janet Mills who specialized in matrimonial cases. Within a week, she had enough evidence to bury Kathy in any divorce proceeding. Photos of her and Roger at 3 different hotels, credit card receipts for expensive dinners and weekend getaways, phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between them, even a recording of Roger bragging to his golf buddies about his hot real estate connection. But Burton was right. Adultery alone wouldn't give me what I wanted. I needed something bigger. What about her business? I asked during our second meeting. What about it? She's been using our joint credit cards for her personal expenses, hotels, dinners, gifts for Roger. Isn't that fraud? Burton's eyes lit up. It's misuse of marital assets, certainly, but fraud requires intent to deceive for financial gain. She deceived me about where the money was going. That's a start. What else? I thought about all the late nights Kathy had claimed to be working, all the business trips that might have been romantic getaways. I think she's been falsifying her expense reports. Now that's interesting. If she's been claiming personal expenses as business deductions, that's tax fraud. And if she's been billing clients for time she was actually spending with her boyfriend, that's embezzlement. Exactly. Burton assigned Janet Mills to investigate Kathy's business practices. What she found was better than I'd hoped. For the past 6 months, the exact duration of the affair, Kathy had been billing clients for hours she'd never worked, claiming business expenses for personal trips, and using company resources for her relationship with Roger. She'd even charged the motel rooms to her corporate credit card as client entertainment. Your wife is looking at serious criminal charges, Burton told me. Federal tax evasion, embezzlement, wire fraud. She could go to prison. What about Roger? He's clean, legally speaking. Morally bankrupt, but clean. That wasn't good enough. If Kathy was going down, Roger was going down with her. What if I told you he was in on it? What if he knew she was using embezzled money to pay for their hotels? Can you prove that? I couldn't, but I knew someone who might be able to help. Roger Whitman worked at First National Bank, where my old high school buddy Tom Jenkins was a vice president. Tom and I had lost touch over the years, but we'd been close once. Close enough that he might be willing to do me a favor. I found Tom at his usual lunch spot, a sandwich shop downtown, where the business crowd gathered to network and gossip. He looked surprised to see me, but not unpleasantly so. Ben Morrison, how long has it been? Too long. I sat down across from him. How's the banking business? Can't complain? How about you? Still fixing cars? Among other things. I leaned forward. Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to keep it between us. His expression grew serious. What's going on? I told him about the affair, about the embezzlement, about how Roger had been benefiting from Kathy's stolen money. Tom listened with growing alarm. Jesus, Ben, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I need to know if Roger's been depositing any unusual amounts lately. Cash deposits, transfers from accounts that aren't his. Tom shook his head. I can't give you that information. Bank privacy laws. I'm not asking you to break any laws. I'm asking you to look out for suspicious activity. Isn't that part of your job? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched sandwich. If there were suspicious deposits, we'd be required to file a report with the Treasury Department. And if someone were to tip you off about potential money laundering, we'd have to investigate. I slid a manila envelope across the table. Hypothetically, if someone left this here by accident and you happened to find it, what would you do? Tom looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Hypothetically, I'd have to examine any evidence of financial crimes. Good. I stood up. Thanks for lunch, Tom. We should do this more often. I left him sitting there with the envelope full of Janet Mills's evidence, knowing that Roger Whitman's banking records were about to get very interesting scrutiny. The next phase of my plan required help from an unexpected source. My daughter, Emily. She'd been calling and texting since I'd left, alternating between anger and manipulation. The latest message was typical. Dad, you're being ridiculous. Mom made a mistake, but you're tearing the family apart. I called her back. Emily, we need to talk. Finally. Dad, you have to come home. Mom's a wreck and people are starting to talk. People are starting to talk because your mother's been having an affair for 6 months. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, but that's not why I called. I was parked outside her college dorm, watching students come and go with the casual confidence of people who thought they had life figured out. I need you to do something for me, I said. What? I need you to post something on your social media. Something about how proud you are of your mother's success. Dad, that's weird. Why would I? Because in about a week, your mother's going to be arrested for embezzlement and tax fraud. And when that happens, everything she's posted online is going to be evidence. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You're lying. I'm not. Your mother has been stealing from her clients to pay for her affair. The FBI is building a case against her right now. The FBI? Tax fraud is a federal crime, Emily. So is wire fraud and embezzlement. Your mother is looking at 5 to 10 years in federal prison. I could hear her crying now, the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come when your world collapses all at once. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand something. For 20 years, I've been the stable one in this family. I've been the one who paid the bills, fixed the problems, and kept everything together while your mother chased her dreams and you chased your social media fame. Dad, I'm not finished. You called me an embarrassment. You said I wasn't a real man. You said your mother could do better. I didn't mean, yes, you did. And now you're going to find out what happens when the embarrassing father stops protecting his ungrateful family. I hung up and drove to the police station, where I had an appointment to give my statement to Detective Sarah Walsh, the white-collar crime specialist who was handling Kathy's case. Walsh was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for thoroughness. She'd been building the case against Kathy for 2 weeks, ever since Burton had turned over our evidence. Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming in. I know this can't be easy. It's easier than you might think. She raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. I need to go over your statement one more time. Make sure we have all the facts straight. For the next hour, I detailed Kathy's crimes with the precision of a mechanic diagnosing engine trouble. Every falsified expense report, every misappropriated client payment, every tax dodge and fraudulent deduction. Walsh took notes with the methodical care of someone building an airtight case. What about Mr. Whitman? She asked. What about him? Did he know your wife was using embezzled funds for their relationship? He had to know. Nobody's that stupid. Suspicion isn't evidence, Mr. Morrison. Then get evidence, Walsh smiled. We're working on it. The arrest came on a Thursday morning. I was at work, replacing the transmission on a 2018 Ford Explorer, when Dave called. Turn on Channel 7, he said. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked to the break room, where the guys were gathered around an old television. On screen, a reporter stood outside Kathy's real estate office while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence to waiting vans. Catherine Morrison, a prominent local real estate agent, was arrested this morning on federal charges of embezzlement, tax evasion, and wire fraud. The charges stem from an investigation into the misuse of client funds and falsified business expenses. The camera cut to footage of Kathy being led away in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hands. She looked smaller somehow, diminished in a way that should have made me feel sorry for her. It didn't. My phone rang constantly for the rest of the day. Reporters, neighbors, Emily calling from college in hysterics. I ignored them all and went back to work, finding comfort in the honest simplicity of fixing broken machines. That evening, I drove to Murphy's Bar, where Dave had prepared for a celebration. The place was busier than usual, filled with locals who'd heard the news and wanted to discuss it over drinks. "Ben!" Mrs. Cartwright, my nosy neighbor, waved me over to her table. "I can't believe it about Kathy. She always seems so successful." "Success is relative," I said, accepting the beer Dave handed me. "But embezzlement, tax fraud, I never would have guessed. People aren't always what they seem." The conversation continued around me, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about Roger Whitman, who'd been conspicuously absent from the news coverage. According to Janet Mills, he'd lawyered up the moment Kathy was arrested, claiming he knew nothing about her financial crimes. That was about to change. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Walsh. "Mr. Morrison, we've made another arrest in your wife's case. Roger Whitman? Among others. It turns out your wife wasn't working alone." The story that emerged over the following days was better than anything I could have planned. Roger hadn't just been Kathy's lover. He'd been her partner in crime, helping her launder stolen money through fake mortgage applications and fraudulent loan documents. The scheme had involved 3 other real estate agents, 2 mortgage brokers, and a bank vice president who wasn't Tom Jenkins. They'd been running it for over a year, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from clients and taxpayers. Roger was looking at 20 years in federal prison. But the best part came when Emily called, sobbing into the phone about how her friends were posting memes about her criminal mother and asking if she was going to be arrested too. "Dad, you have to help me. People are saying terrible things online." "What kind of things?" "They're calling Mom a thief. They're saying our whole family is criminals." "Aren't they?" "Dad, please, I'm sorry about what I said before. I was wrong." "Yes, you were." "So you'll help me?" I looked out the window of Dave's apartment at the quiet street below, thinking about all the years I'd spent being the responsible one, the fixer, the man who cleaned up everyone else's messes. "Emily, for 20 years, I've been helping this family. I've worked 2 jobs to pay for your college, fixed every problem that came up, and kept my mouth shut when I should have spoken up. I know, and I'm grateful. No, you're not. You're scared." "There's a difference." "Dad, please. You called me an embarrassment. You said I wasn't a real man. You said your mother could do better. I was wrong." "Yes, you were. But here's the thing about being wrong, Emily. Sometimes there are consequences." I hung up and blocked her number. The trial lasted 3 months. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching my wife's defense attorney try to paint her as a victim of manipulation and financial pressure. It didn't work. Kathy was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Roger got 12. The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 3 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. During the sentencing hearing, Kathy's lawyer asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I declined. I'd said everything I needed to say. But as the bailiff led her away to begin her sentence, Kathy turned and looked at me one last time. Her eyes were full of hatred and accusation, as if this were somehow my fault. I smiled and waved goodbye. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Since Kathy was a convicted felon, I got everything. The house, the cars, the savings accounts she hadn't managed to steal. Emily tried to contest the will, claiming I was being vindictive, but Burton made short work of her legal challenge. "Your daughter has no standing," he explained. "She's an adult, and there's no requirement that you support her." "What about college?" "What about it? You're not legally obligated to pay for her education." Emily dropped out of school and moved in with Kathy's sister in California. She sent me a few angry letters, then stopped communicating entirely. I heard through mutual friends that she was working as a waitress and living in a studio apartment. I didn't lose any sleep over it. The house felt different without them, quieter, but not in a bad way. I sold Kathy's BMW and used the money to renovate the kitchen, tearing out the granite countertops she'd loved and replacing them with butcher block I'd made myself. Dave helped me repaint the living room, covering Kathy's beige walls with deep blue that reminded me of the ocean. We hung my tools on pegboard in the garage and set up a workshop where I could restore classic cars in my spare time. "You seem different," Dave said one evening as we sat on the back deck, drinking beer and watching the sunset. "How so?" "Happier, more like the guy I knew in high school." I thought about that. I spent 22 years trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to live up to standards that were designed to make me fail. And now? Now I'm just me. 6 months after the divorce was final, I ran into Tom Jenkins at the hardware store. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, probably wondering if I knew about his role in Roger's downfall. "Ben, how are you holding up?" "Better than expected." I picked up a box of screws and examined the label. "How's the banking business?" "Busy. We've had to implement a lot of new compliance procedures after the whole Whitman thing." "I bet." He shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly wanting to leave but not sure how to escape the conversation. "Listen, Ben, about that envelope." "What envelope?" He looked relieved. "Right. Well, I should get going. Good seeing you." I watched him hurry away, probably to tell his wife that Ben Morrison seemed to be doing just fine despite everything. The story would spread through town within hours, adding another chapter to the local legend I'd become. The truth was, I was doing better than fine. For the first time in decades, I was living life on my own terms. I worked when I wanted to work, ate what I wanted to eat, and spent my evenings doing things I enjoyed instead of listening to complaints about my inadequacies. I'd even started dating, though nothing serious. A few dinners with Janet Mills, the private investigator who'd helped build the case against Kathy. She was smart, funny, and appreciated the fact that I could fix her car when it broke down. "You're not what I expected," she said one night over dinner. "What did you expect? A bitter ex-husband looking for revenge?" "Revenge?" I cut into my steak, considering the word. "No, I don't think that's what this was." "What would you call it?" "Justice. There's a difference." She smiled. "Is there? Revenge is about hurting people because they hurt you. Justice is about making sure actions have consequences." "And you think what happened to your wife and daughter was justice?" I thought about Kathy in her federal prison uniform, probably complaining to her cellmates about how unfair life was. I thought about Emily waiting tables in California, finally learning what it meant to work for a living. I think they got exactly what they deserved. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Janet's question stayed with me. Was I a man seeking justice, or just another bitter ex-husband who'd gotten lucky? The answer came to me a few weeks later when I received an unexpected visitor. Emily stood on my front porch, looking older and thinner than when I'd last seen her. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a faded t-shirt, and her once perfect manicure was chipped and worn. "Hi, Dad." "Emily, can I come in?" I considered saying no, then stepped aside and let her enter. She looked around the renovated living room with obvious surprise. "It looks different. I made some changes." She sat on the couch, new, leather, comfortable, and folded her hands in her lap. "I came to apologize." "For what?" "For everything. For the things I said, for taking Mom's side, for not understanding what kind of man you really are." I sat across from her in my favorite chair, the one Kathy had always complained was too big for the room. "What kind of man am I, Emily?" "The kind who keeps his word. The kind who works hard and doesn't make excuses. The kind who—" her voice broke. "The kind who deserved better than what we gave you." "Yes, I did." She looked surprised by my bluntness, but I was done pretending things were different than they were. "I've been working as a waitress," she said. "It's hard work, honest work. I never understood that before." "No, you didn't." "I want to come home, Dad. I want to finish college, get my life back on track." "That's not going to happen." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "You made your choice, Emily. You chose your mother over me, chose image over substance, chose to be ashamed of the man who sacrificed everything for your happiness. But I'm apologizing. Apologizing doesn't undo 20 years of contempt." She started to cry, but they were the same manipulative tears her mother had used, designed to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. "Dad, please. I'm your daughter." "No, you're Kathy's daughter. You made that clear." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I stood up, feeling the familiar anger rise in my chest. "You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been having a daughter who respected her father. Fair would have been having a wife who honored her marriage vows. Fair would have been 22 years of loyalty instead of 22 years of being treated like a servant in my own home." Emily was sobbing now. but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no desire to comfort her. I gave you everything, I continued. I worked 60-hour weeks to pay for your college, your car, your clothes, your spring break trips. I went without so you could have what you wanted. And how did you repay me? By calling me an embarrassment. I was wrong. Yes, you were. And now you get to live with the consequences. I walked to the front door and opened it. Goodbye, Emily. She stood up slowly, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Dad, you can't mean this. I've never meant anything more in my life. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. What am I supposed to do? The same thing I did when I was your age. Figure it out. I closed the door and listened to her footsteps retreat down the front walk. Through the window, I watched her get into a battered Honda Civic and drive away, probably back to California and her studio apartment and her waitressing job. I felt no sadness, no regret, no second thoughts. Emily had made her choice years ago, and now she was living with it. That night, Dave came over with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. We sat on the back deck, drinking and watching the stars appear in the clear November sky. Heard you had a visitor today, he said. News travels fast in this town. Mrs. Cartwright saw her leave, said she looked upset. She was. Dave poured another round. You okay with how it went? I thought about the question, rolling the bourbon around in my mouth and letting it burn away the last traces of doubt. For 22 years, I was the good guy, the provider, the protector, the one who fixed everyone's problems and never complained. I was reliable, dependable, boring Ben Morrison, who could always be counted on to do the right thing. And now? Now I'm the guy who destroyed his cheating wife and ungrateful daughter without breaking a single law or telling a single lie. Dave raised his glass. To justice. To justice. We drank in comfortable silence, 2 middle-aged men who'd learned that sometimes the good guys do win as long as they're willing to stop being good. The next morning I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by my own things. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint, no one to judge me for being exactly who I was. I made coffee in my renovated kitchen, read the newspaper at my butcher block counter, and planned my day around my own priorities. It was a simple pleasure, but one I'd been denied for most of my adult life. At work, I fixed a transmission on a 2020 Camaro, rebuilt an engine for a 1967 Mustang, and helped train a new apprentice who reminded me of myself at that age, eager to learn, willing to work, proud of his skills. Mr. Morrison, the kid said as we cleaned up at the end of the day, can I ask you something? Sure. How do you know when you're good at this job? I thought about the question, remembering my own early days in the shop, the uncertainty and self-doubt that came with learning a trade. When you can fix something that's broken and make it better than it was before. Is that what you do? I looked around the shop, at the tools I'd mastered, and the machines I'd repaired, at the honest work that had sustained me through 2 decades of marriage to a woman who thought I wasn't good enough. Yeah, I said. That's exactly what I do. 6 months later, I received a letter from the federal prison where Kathy was serving her sentence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 4 pages long, filled with complaints about prison conditions, protestations of innocence, and demands that I visit her. But it was the last paragraph that caught my attention. Ben, I know you think I deserve this, but I need you to understand something. Everything I did because I felt trapped in a life that was too small for me. You were a good husband, but you were never going to be enough. Roger made me feel like I could be more than just the wife of a mechanic. I hope someday you can forgive me. I read the letter twice, then walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. Watching it burn, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Kathy was right about one thing. I was never going to be enough for her. But that was her problem, not mine. The truth was, I'd spent so many years trying to be enough for people who would never be satisfied that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be enough for myself. Now I knew. I was sitting on my back deck, drinking a beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Walsh. I wanted to let you know that Roger Whitman died in prison yesterday. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no emotion at all. What happened? Heart attack. Apparently he'd been having chest pains for weeks, but didn't want to go to the prison hospital. I see. I thought you should know. His death officially closes the case. After she hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about Roger Whitman's last moments. Had he thought about the choices that led him to die alone in a federal prison? Had he regretted the affair that cost him his freedom, his family, his life? Probably not. Men like Roger never took responsibility for their actions. The next morning brought news that was far more interesting than Roger's death. Emily had been arrested in California for credit card fraud, apparently trying to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford with her waitressing income. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mother and daughter, both criminals, both paying the price for thinking they were above the rules that governed ordinary people. I didn't post bail. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't even return the calls from the public defender who was handling her case. Emily Morrison was no longer my problem. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried, something I hadn't done since their funerals years earlier. Their graves were simple, marked with modest headstones that bore their names and dates. John Morrison, honest mechanic, devoted husband, loving father. Mary Morrison, beloved wife and mother. I stood there for a long time, thinking about the lessons they'd tried to teach me about hard work, integrity, and self-respect. Lessons I'd forgotten somewhere along the way in my desperate attempt to be worthy of a woman who would never see my value. I finally figured it out, I said aloud, feeling foolish but needing to say the words. It took me 22 years, but I finally figured out who I'm supposed to be. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment I could almost hear my father's voice. About time, son. I drove home as the sun was setting, past the motel where I'd discovered Kathy's betrayal, past the real estate office that now bore someone else's name, past the bank where Roger Whitman had once worked. The town looked the same, but everything had changed. I was no longer the pathetic husband everyone pitied, no longer the doormat who accepted whatever scraps of respect his family threw his way. I was Ben Morrison, master mechanic, successful businessman, and the man who'd brought down a criminal conspiracy without firing a shot or throwing a punch. I was enough. That night, I called Janet Mills and asked her to dinner. Not because I was lonely, not because I needed validation, but because I enjoyed her company and wanted to spend time with someone who appreciated me for who I was. I was hoping you'd call, she said. Were you? I've been thinking about what you said about justice versus revenge. And I think you were right. There is a difference. We talked for an hour, making plans for the weekend, discussing books we'd read and places we wanted to travel. It was the kind of conversation I'd never had with Kathy, who'd always been too busy or too distracted or too contemptuous to engage with me as an equal. After I hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and sat in my leather chair, looking around the living room I'd transformed from Kathy's sterile showcase into a comfortable space that reflected my own tastes. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with histories and biographies and technical manuals. The coffee table held copies of automotive magazines and a half-finished crossword puzzle. The mantel displayed photos of classic cars I'd restored and a few pictures of my parents. There were no photos of Kathy or Emily. I'd burned those along with Kathy's letter. This was my space now, my sanctuary, my reward for 30 years of honest work and 22 years of unappreciated sacrifice. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the man I'd become, then settled back to read a book about the history of American manufacturing, a subject that would have bored my ex-wife to tears, but fascinated me. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows and sent dead leaves skittering across the deck. But inside, I was warm and comfortable and completely at peace with the choices I'd made. Kathy had been right about one thing. I was never going to be enough for her. But I was finally enough for myself, and that made all the difference. The phone rang once more that evening, a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with growing amusement. It was from a reporter at the state newspaper asking for an interview about my role in exposing the real estate fraud ring. Apparently, the story had attracted attention beyond our small town, and I was being hailed as a whistleblower who'd brought down a major criminal conspiracy. I deleted the message without returning the call. I had no interest in being anyone's hero or villain. I was simply a man who'd refused to be a victim, who'd used the system to achieve justice when justice was called for. The next morning brought a letter from Emily's public defender, asking if I would write a character reference for her sentencing hearing. The lawyer explained that Emily was facing 2 to 5 years in state prison and that a letter from her father might convince the judge to show leniency. I wrote the letter that same day. To whom it may concern. Emily Morrison is a young woman who has never learned that actions have consequences. She has been raised to believe that her wants and needs take precedence over everyone else's, including her father's. She has shown contempt for honest work, disdain for personal responsibility, and a complete lack of respect for the man who sacrificed everything to give her opportunities she squandered. I believe a lengthy prison sentence might finally teach her the lessons her mother and I failed to instill. I recommend you show her the same mercy she showed me. Sincerely, Ben Morrison. I mailed the letter that afternoon, along with copies of Emily's social media posts mocking me and transcripts of the phone calls where she'd called me an embarrassment. The judge sentenced her to the maximum, 5 years in state prison. I felt nothing but satisfaction. 2 years passed quietly. I expanded my business, hiring 3 more mechanics and opening a second location across town. I bought a small cabin on a lake an hour north of town, where I spent weekends fishing and reading and enjoying the silence. Janet and I had been dating steadily, but we kept our own places, our own independence. She understood that I'd had enough of being taken for granted, and she respected my need for space. "You're different from other men I've dated," she told me one evening as we sat on the cabin's deck, watching the sunset reflect off the water. "How so?" "You know who you are. You're not trying to impress me or change me or turn me into someone else. I've learned that people are who they are. You can't fix them and you shouldn't try. Is that why you never tried to fix your marriage?" I thought about the question, sipping my bourbon and listening to the loons call across the water. I spent 22 years trying to fix my marriage. I worked longer hours to make more money. I bit my tongue when Kathy criticized me. I tried to be the man she wanted instead of the man I was. And it didn't work. It made things worse. The more I tried to please her, the less she respected me. The more I sacrificed, the more she expected. So you stopped trying. I stopped trying to fix her. I started fixing the situation. Janet smiled. By destroying her. By letting her destroy herself. I just made sure there were consequences. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the clear sky. I felt no need to fill the quiet with meaningless conversation, and neither did she. This was what peace felt like. The absence of conflict, the presence of respect, the simple pleasure of being accepted for who you were. The next morning brought a call from Detective Walsh with news that surprised even me. "Mr. Morrison, I thought you should know that your ex-wife was found dead in her cell yesterday morning." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What happened?" "Suicide. She hanged herself with a bedsheet." I felt a brief moment of something that might have been sadness, but it passed quickly. "Was there a note?" "Yes. She blamed you for ruining her life." "Of course she did. The prison chaplain asked if you wanted to claim the body for burial." "No." "What should I tell him?" "Tell him Catherine Morrison was buried the day she decided to betray her marriage vows. What's left is just evidence of poor choices." After Walsh hung up, I sat on my deck for a long time, thinking about the woman I'd married 24 years earlier. She'd been beautiful then, ambitious and confident and full of dreams about the life we'd build together. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had curdled into resentment and contempt. She'd started seeing me as an obstacle to her happiness instead of a partner in building it. I wondered if things could have been different if I'd been stronger from the beginning, if I'd demanded respect instead of hoping to earn it. But that was a pointless exercise. The past was fixed, unchangeable, as dead as the woman who'd shared my bed for more than 2 decades. What mattered was the future, and for the first time in years, I was looking forward to it. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery and bought a small headstone for Kathy's grave. Nothing elaborate, just her name and dates and a simple inscription. She made her choices. The funeral director looked surprised when I handed him the order. "That's an unusual epitaph, Mr. Morrison. It's an accurate one." 3 people attended Kathy's funeral: me, the prison chaplain, and a reporter from the local newspaper. No tears were shed, no eulogies delivered. She was buried in a plain pine coffin in the cheapest section of the cemetery, as far from my parents' graves as possible. After the brief service, the chaplain approached me. "Mr. Morrison, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her." I looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Why?" "For your own peace of mind. Anger is a poison that hurts the one who carries it." "I'm not angry, chaplain. I haven't been angry for a long time." "Then why—" he gestured toward the grave. "Why did I destroy her? Because she needed to be destroyed. Because she was a cancer that would have spread if I hadn't cut it out. The chaplain looked shocked. That's a terrible thing to say about your wife. Ex-wife. And it's a true thing to say. I walked away, leaving him standing beside the grave of a woman who died as she'd lived, blaming everyone else for the consequences of her own actions. That evening, I had dinner with Janet at a restaurant overlooking the lake. She'd heard about Kathy's death on the news and wanted to make sure I was okay. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free." "That's all?" "That's everything." She reached across the table and took my hand. "What happens now?" "Now I live the life I want instead of the life other people think I should want." "And what kind of life is that?" I looked out at the lake, where a family of ducks was swimming in formation, the parents leading their young toward the safety of the reeds. "A quiet life, an honest life, a life where my word means something and my work has value." Sounds lonely. I've been lonely for 22 years, surrounded by people who didn't respect me. Now, I'm alone, surrounded by people who do. Including me? Especially you. We finished dinner and drove to my cabin, where we sat on the deck and talked until midnight about books and travel and the future we might build together. Not the desperate future of two people afraid of being alone, but the chosen future of two people who enjoyed each other's company. The next morning, I received a call from Emily's public defender with news I'd been expecting. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter was found dead in her cell yesterday. I'm sorry for your loss." "What happened?" "Another inmate, some kind of dispute over commissary privileges." I felt nothing. No grief, no anger, no regret. Emily Morrison had died years ago, the day she chose to side with her criminal mother against her honest father. "Mr. Morrison, are you there?" "Yes." "Will you be claiming the body?" "No. What should we do with—" "Whatever you do with unclaimed bodies, I don't care." I hung up and deleted the number from my phone. Emily's story was over, ended by the same kind of poor judgment that had defined her entire adult life. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' graves and stood between their headstones, feeling their presence in a way I hadn't since childhood. "It's over," I said aloud. "They're both gone, and I'm free." The wind rustled through the oak trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of winter. But I felt no chill, no sadness, no regret. I felt like a man who'd finally come home. 6 months later, Janet moved into the cabin with me. Not because we needed each other, but because we wanted to share the life we'd each built independently. We were married on a Saturday morning in October, with Dave as my best man and Janet's sister as her maid of honor. The ceremony was simple, the vows honest, the celebration modest. No one from my previous life attended. Kathy and Emily were dead, and the friends who'd sided with them during the divorce were no longer welcome in my world. After the ceremony, Dave raised his glass in a toast. "To Ben Morrison, the man who proved that sometimes the good guys do win." "To justice," I replied, raising my own glass. "To justice," the small crowd echoed. We drank to justice, to new beginnings, to the simple truth that actions have consequences and character matters more than charm. Later that evening, as Janet and I sat on our deck watching the stars reflect in the lake, she asked me a question I'd been expecting. "Do you ever regret what happened to them? Which part? Any of it? All of it?" I thought about Kathy dying alone in a prison cell, about Emily bleeding out on a jailhouse floor, about the family I'd once thought I wanted. I regret that it took me so long to see who they really were. I regret the years I wasted trying to earn their respect. I regret that I didn't stand up for myself sooner. But you don't regret what you did to them? I didn't do anything to them, Janet. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. And that's justice? That's life. She squeezed my hand and leaned against my shoulder, comfortable with the man she'd married. A man who understood the difference between mercy and weakness, between forgiveness and foolishness. I love you, Ben Morrison. I love you too. We sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other after learning who they really were. The lake was calm, the night was quiet, and for the first time in decades, I was exactly where I belonged. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, next to a woman who respected me for who I was, rather than resenting me for who I wasn't. I made coffee in my kitchen, read the newspaper at my table, and planned my day around my own priorities. It was a simple life, an honest life, A life built on the foundation of self-respect I'd finally learned to value. Outside, the November wind was blowing leaves across the deck, but inside I was warm and comfortable and completely at peace. Ben Morrison had finally become the man he was meant to be, not the doormat who accepted whatever scraps his family threw his way, not the victim who suffered in silence while others took advantage of his good nature, but the man who understood that respect must be earned and that some people will never be satisfied, no matter what you do for them. I was enough. I had always been enough. It just took me 50 years to figure it out. And that, I thought, as I sipped my coffee and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and orange, was the best revenge of all.